Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar Weekly discussion topic video. And as you can see from the title, this one is going to be why we need an Avatar expanded universe. So what I mean by expanded universe is, I suppose the best example is that in the past, all the books and comics and extra stuff for Star Wars used to be called the Star Wars expanded universe. Obviously they've changed up how that works now, but fundamentally just the idea of there being all of this other kind of media to add and expand out the fictional universe of a property. So in that case, Star Wars. In this case, we need it for Avatar. Now, it seems like we have one at the moment because we get Avatar comics, and we've just started Korra comics, and that seems like, yes, it's expanding the universe, and it is to a degree. But the issue is that it always feels like everything about the world of Avatar has to be linked to one of those two shows. It seems like we're never just going to get a story set somewhere in the universe about, not about an Avatar, not about someone directly related to a character that we already know. And I think that's where there's a huge missed opportunity with this franchise, Avatar, to not do that stuff. They really should be attempting to, especially Dark Horse, having the comic license. Obviously, we don't know the full scope of what that entails. Are they allowed to do that, or does everything have to be approved through Nickelodeon, approved through Mike and Brian to even work? But it speaks to the greater potential issue of just, it seems like Mike and Brian don't necessarily have like a huge plan for what is like next for Avatar. It seems like they just had this license deal with Dark Horse, and they just put out comics like whenever, and it's a slow kind of drip of comics and new information. But for me, and I think it's telling that the fandom is kind of really getting that way, that we want more content. And it's weird to see that like Mike comes out in interviews about Turf Wars and says that like he's surprised that there's still such a fandom here, and it really speaks to the fact that, like, really, Mike, why are you at all surprised that both shows had such a huge fan base? The comics have all sold well. Why do you think that just the fandom is just going to disappear? Of course we want new content. We'll take any new content. So why is there no plan to actually present more content for the fandom that's actually there? Now, what I'm not asking for here is for them to immediately jump from what it currently is, which is basically we get 3 storybooks a year, and then usually 1 or 2 extra ancillary pieces of merchandise. I'm not asking for it to jump from that to being like, oh, here's 7 comic trilogies each year, 10 novels, and all this sort of stuff. No, but start to build on it. Why can't we just start very simply with, we get an Avatar book a year and a Korra book a year? Now, maybe that doesn't necessarily mean we get 6 comics in the space of a year, but that we get close to it, that the comics are being run kind of side by side. So it's not a case of Turf Wars, came out a few weeks ago, people read it, and now we have to wait until January with nothing really in between. Imagine how it would be if we have Turf Wars Part 1 now, and then in a few weeks from here we have the first part of the next Avatar comic. Then it's just like, oh, okay, you're kind of filling in the gaps here, and it's not as long of a wait between each book. As it is right now, the quality of the 1 book a year that we get means that it kind of determines how good or bad of a year it was for Avatar on its own. So effectively, the North and South year of comics that we got was a fairly weak one, because as much as the book is, it was a popular book and it was still a bestseller and people liked it, it wasn't as impactful or meaningful of a story as people expected, and really kind of highlights that if you're only going to give us 1 story a year, it has to be a notable story within the universe. You can't just immediately fall back into let's just basically, we can sell, if we use these characters that people know and care about, put them in a scenario, it will sell. Give us something important about those characters. And it's all the more, I suppose, telling with Avatar especially, that there is so much that people want to know about these characters, yet that book, for the most part, didn't really tackle a lot of the things that people expected it to. And if they're going to be that slow with it, and especially as we lead up into the next Avatar comic announcement, which I assume is going to take place at New York Comic Con, maybe just before it, maybe just afterwards, that book, when they announce it, it has to, I think, really be very clear, whether that be from the title, the cover, or the product description, that it's telling a story that we want to know. So the biggest one obviously would be Azula's story. That is immediately going to be like everyone on board for it, because why it's so unique compared to North and South is that we don't know anything about Azula past her last appearance in the comics. We don't have a clue where she goes from here, and she is a very important character. So, you know, what happened to her? That's a big thing to know. Plus, of course, they can use all of the everything else that they have going on and use the fact that they're filling in a gap. They're filling in a gap between the end of Avatar and Korra. There's only so much time that you have there. There's certain things you can and can't do, and the stuff that we know that happens, that we'd like to actually know what happens there. So that's I think the first step is to, tell the stories from the two shows, expanding the two shows that you need to tell. But then I think for the, future of the franchise, you do need to, I think, start to try and tell a story that is not dependent on the two shows. And that's not what I mean. What I mean by that is not that they should immediately be like, okay, here is the Dark Horse Comics Avatar, and we'll just tell an Avatar story involving that. That's potentially an okay idea, but I'm kind of just like, why don't we just go like set it in a time period? Like this universe isn't just those two shows. We have like 10,000 years where we have avatars involved. We have a couple, I don't know how long, but like at least maybe a couple thousand years where humans exist before bending or the avatar even comes into play. Then we've got all this potentially even longer time period where the spirits exist but maybe humans aren't around. All of this time period to play around with, and it feels like we're just glued to the two show stuff when the universe is expanded to a degree with the origin of the Avatar story, with the hint that the Lion Turtles are these like ancient beings, and in spirits in general, some of them being established to have been around since the beginning. You can really bring in like a story at any point that you want to tell, without really running into too many like continuity errors or anything like that. Like immediately, just let's say Water Tribe story. The obvious one would be, what exactly was the situation, the scenario surrounding the people who left the Northern Water Tribe to form the Southern Water Tribe in the first place? Like, we know it's obviously about the rules, but what really happened? There must have been a specific incident that really caused the people to just decide at that point in time, this is when we're leaving. This is where we're going down to the south to create our own place. And was it always the aim to go to the South Pole? Did they know that that was a place? Or did they just happen to come across it? What happened there? Like, Thod's story from North and South about the snow rats gives you an idea about potentially what happened, but not the full story, absolutely. And it will give you a chance to explore a, much older water tribe, in that obviously we don't know exactly when it takes place, but it has to be somewhere, obviously, between, the start of the Avatar and where we are now. And it realistically is earlier than I think any Avatar that we currently kind of know up to, in that it seems like obviously the Southern Water Tribe existed realistically when Karuk was still alive, so it must have happened sometime before then. So you've got about 9,000 years to play with about when that exactly takes place. That would be a fun story to tell, in that you have the job of introducing all of these new characters. Who was the Northern Water Tribe chief at the time? Who was the key leader that led to them leaving the South, and so on? That seems like a really interesting story you could tell. Let's take the Earth Kingdom, just with regards to locations. Ba Sing Se. The walls weren't always there. What led to them being built? What were the underground city of Ba Sing Se, the old caverns like? What was that like? And why was this specific location chosen to be like the biggest city in the world? There's stories you can tell there. Which Earth King was in play? What was the Earth King in play? Is the Earth King only related to the walls, or was the Earth King around prior to that? We might know that already, but I just can't really remember it off the top of my head. Stuff like that. Even the Fire Nation, like, you have all this Fire Sage history of, like, there was a point in time where the head Fire Sage was the Fire Lord, and then it was kind of, it turned back to being just like a power position, and the sages were not related to the leadership. You know, there's the whole Fire Island story with the first Avatar. There's a lot of different things you can actually do. And then even getting a bit closer, I suppose, to ATLA and Korra timeline, the Air Nomad genocide story. I think it's kind of a weird one that we just don't know what happened. Like, we don't know the full details of what exactly happened. Obviously, it's a bit weird about whether, like, Afiko from the trading card game, like, is canon or not. Right now, with no intent to tell the story, and us not knowing many details about the story, Afiko's story from the trading card game doesn't contradict anything, so that's kind of what we take as canon as to what happened. But still, it's still based off a few trading card game lines of flavor text. Tell that full story. What exactly happened that led to Afiko wanting to betray the Air Nomads? What was his relationship with Sozin like? How did the attack on the temples really go down? Was it all of them hit at the same time? Was it the southern one hit first, and then they went around in a certain order? You know, Sozin, like, obviously the comet was around prior to Sozin, but he was the one who first harnessed it in that way. Where did he learn about the comet and, like, that this is something he could use? That seems like a really, really good story. And then you can also, like, develop Gyatso more. You could potentially do this really unique thing where, like, Gyatso and Afiko were maybe rivals, and they had a fight at the Air Temple, and, like, Afiko maybe left Gyatso for dead, and the Fire Nation people that he killed, obviously we know where his skeleton is, finished him off. There's so much potential with that story, and that will kind of be an expanded universe one, because for the context of Avatar, all we really needed to know was just that the other airbenders were wiped out. It wasn't a requirement to tell the ATLA story that we knew the details of how it happened, but it's still a fascinating idea of a story, in that I suppose the best example off the top of my head from another fictional universe I can think of is Halo. So everyone knows that the big thing in Halo in the first couple of games is it's humanity against the Covenant of aliens. And the story basically actually takes place for Halo 1, 2, 3, actually towards the end of the war between those two factions. So the question is, like, how did the war begin? And it actually is covered in one of the books, Contact Harvest. And I think this is a similar type of a story of just like, we know a war, we know roughly how the war started with the Roku Sozin story from the Avatar and the Fire Lord, but we don't get the details on how he then executed that first strike. And I think that's an opportunity for them to at some point tell that story, in that it's perfect to tell in an expanded universe format, because it is a darker story. It's a more violent story, in that it's about genocide. It's about this decision to betray a whole group of people and then wipe them all out for a certain reason. And then if you're really committing to Sozin being this person who hates other people's ideas, as they seem to suggest in Turf Wars, use this opportunity to say that he didn't just, like, go after the airbenders because the current Avatar would have been from the airbenders, but because he actually, like, disagreed with them for whatever reason, that he maybe wiped them out because they were the most open about those different types of relationships that are there. Link in the Turf War stuff. Make Sozin a real proper villain by demonstrating this thing from the past. You can link all of this stuff together if you absolutely want to. And I think a comic or a novel is perfect to tell that story. And you have a lot of the setup there already without too much like details getting in the way. We just have that, like, Afiko is this key player. He's killed by Sozin before, like, I suppose from Sozin's perspective, before Afiko can, like, betray Sozin, Sozin kills him and takes him out, so Sozin doesn't have to deal with Afiko potentially betraying him at some point. And there's all of these different types of stories you can tell. Obviously, yes, there's a lot of stories that we still need to know from Aang, Sokka, Katara, you know, Korra, Mako, Bolin, Asami, all of the main characters from the two shows. But don't forget that this is a big universe. There's so much other stuff going on. Like, there are all these little references here and there to all these other stories that we get very vague references to, like Earth Kingdom tribes, you know. I'd like a little side story of what actually did happen between the Ganjin tribes, the Ganjin and the Zhang tribes in the past. What was the issue that, like, the real event that caused the Great Divide issue? That would be a nice little short story to tell. And another thing I suppose would be just like a little story going like further back. Like, again, I think what Beginnings as episodes did was that they really presented this idea that the Avatar world is so interesting to explore when you take it at different points in the timeline. Because, like, back in Beginnings, obviously there are benders around, but like there's very few people who are actually like skilled at bending. And it's in those early stages where like humans are really starting to learn how to like harness it as like a martial art form. Like, what about like the second Avatar? Just touching on like how did the first like actual start of the cycle? Because Wan obviously was an adult when he became the Avatar, and as much as, you know, to some degree the situation was forced upon him, it was something he wanted to do and accepted. But how did the first person who's kind of just born into it accept that role? How is he informed that he is the second in line to this new being, the Avatar? That is just as interesting of a story, I think, as like the first Avatar, because there's that first person in the cycle, the first person who didn't have a choice to be involved in this or not. How does that exactly work? How does the legend of the Avatar really move around and spread? I think that's really, really interesting stuff. And then I do think there's a lot of opportunity with just telling the story of like the stuff they skip past in Wan's story, of just like, what was this fight between humans that we see that like involves all of the nations except the Airbenders? What went down there? And then if you really want to go like more potentially, you know, deep into the lore, ancient history, cover the Lion Turtles and why they felt the need to protect humans. Why was, in terms of human history, the era like just before the Avatar came into being kind of known as the era of the Lion Turtles? Why was that the case? Why did they, in a way, sacrifice some of their freedom of movement to allow humanity to survive? That speaks to a kind of almost like a Halo type concept with like the precursors and the forerunners of just like the mantle of responsibility that like a certain type of being or species is tasked with maintaining peace and order and balance within the galaxy in Halo's case. And in Avatar's case, is it the case that someone told the Lion Turtles, or the Lion Turtles were the first persons who felt that balance was this key thing and someone needs to be tasked with the role of maintaining it, and the Lion Turtles did it initially, and then they realized that the Avatar, as like this blend of humans and spirits, were the correct ones to do that. And just really, I think, get into the idea of like what spirits are, why are they so invested in the physical world despite like not really seeming to care massively about the humans who inhabit the physical world, and that it is this weird situation where the implication in the lore seems to be that the spirits are kind of responsible for kind of what turned the physical world into what it is, with hints that obviously the moon and its effect on the tides is due to a spirit. The implication that mountains and like valleys and all of these geographical kind of situations happen because of spirits, like rock spirits or whatever. That these things are the way they are fundamentally because of the physical world is inhabitable by living beings like humans because of the spirits. But then the way the spirits kind of act is like humans mess up kind of in a way what they've created. But if nothing is there living in that world, what is it actually all about? And it speaks to the idea that like, you know, the spirits are capable of like some level of like doing things, but they're fundamentally like a non-creative type of being, in that they don't seem to, there's no sense of like art with spirits, or as much as like they physically change, they can't as like individuals change as much as humans can. That in any sort of like fiction where like humanity has this kind of ancient history, it's often a case where their most unique trait is how adaptable they are, that they can change like that, and that makes them both like really adaptable and, you know, perfect for a lot of situations, but it also means it kind of brings a lot of issues with it as well. But the benefits outweigh the negatives. So I'd like a little bit more of that sort of stuff brought in. And then, like, again, the examples I used were like fairly basic ones of just what's the history behind like some of the key locations in the Avatar world. But there's all these opportunities to tell stories about, like, you know, the Earth Kingdom is this very kind of militaristic place. There's a lot of issues with regards to like classes up and down. How did those really start in the first place? Like, what king made the wrong decision early on? What's the deal with like there being a king in Omashu? How did that position come into play? In relation, I suppose, does it in any way relate to Oma and Shu and reverence towards them, that they have a king of the place where they kind of helped to found? That sort of thing. And then, of course, there's, imagine a story just about spirits. Imagine you really began to characterize some spirits, and we got to actually properly know some of the spirits as characters. We have little bits and pieces in that we know the likes of Rava, Ai, Wan Shi Tong, and so on, the spirits that do speak and get a little bit more focused. But none of them we know enough to like really get into their characters in the same way that like we know an Aang or a Korra. It would be cool to kind of have like a main character spirit in a story at some point. But yeah, I don't want to just go on about like a million different ideas for stories, but just presenting this idea here of why, like in any way, has none of this stuff even like attempted to be told in the story? Why is no one talking about this within the fandom for the most part? And then why was all of this stuff even set up in the first place if there's no intent to ever really fill it out? In that, like, obviously we expect at some point we will get a new Avatar TV show. But when that happens, do we just want like the basic kind of thing that we kind of expect, or just like it'll be an Earth Avatar next following the cycle, and they'll try and do a unique angle on that, and it'll be probably set further into the future? It depends on what Mike O'Brien wants to do creatively with that. Are we kind of okay with that? Because I'd almost be like, I'd like to see how Mike O'Brien would do a story where the Avatar isn't the main character, that maybe the Avatar is that character who comes in like at the end of like a season 1 or a season 2 and is kind of the outsider perspective of meeting the Avatar. That would be a really cool dynamic to have, of just follow this group of kind of maybe beginners in training, and they go on this journey and they think they're getting strong, and then they encounter the Avatar and they see how powerful all 4 elements who's really skilled is, and something like that. Just a different type of story, rather than us always having to be, our main character is the Avatar, here's the team that forms around them and their journey. You know, what would a main character who's not an Avatar be like, kind of thing. But again, that's all I'm really proposing here in this video, is that what we have right now is good. The comics are really good outside of, I think, North and South. It was a little bit of a step down at a time when it didn't really, it was kind of poorly timed, the quality of that story at the time. Turf Wars Part 1 is impressing a lot of people, but I think for kind of reasons that aren't really necessarily all about Avatar. In terms of the story and like character development stuff, world building, you know, Turf Wars isn't really the greatest on that front, but has the potential with what they're doing with the human spirit conflict. So Avatar and Korra comics have like a, you know, it's where they're going seems quite strong. But what about that third angle of just a story that isn't just focused on Korra, isn't just focused on Aang and the main characters who surround them? What about that Iroh backstory? What about, like Iroh Ozai, like in my most recent Avatar rewatch? That episode, the first episode of Book 2, really highlights that we just don't know about Iroh and Ozai's relationship. Tell that story. Tell Azula's story. tell the story of the Air Nomad genocide. All of these things, I think, are stuff that at some point should be told in the universe, because why don't we know what happened, the details of what happened in the Air Nomad genocide? Some of these like especially Iroh, I think, is now at the point where, like, why is his story being kept a secret? Why wasn't any of that stuff explored within the show? Because it is still one of the more mysterious aspects of, like, Iroh going to the spirit world. Like, we know he's spiritual now, but it's because, like, they established in Korra that he transferred over to the spirit world and is going to become a spirit over time. How did he do that for the first time? Where did his spirituality come from? Was he always that way, or what? So, I'm going to end the video there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this idea. Like, do you feel that this is something that should happen? That they should, Dark Horse, Mike and Brian, whoever, they should really make an effort now going forward to try and create a more unique story in addition to the stuff that's continuing Avatar and continuing Korra, that they should try and do a little bit more of an expanded universe type of story to flesh out the world a bit more, and kind of mean that, like, maybe when we get that third series, you know, it can be still about another Avatar, but we've already had these other stories where it's focused on other stuff. So let me know your thoughts on the Avatar Expanded Universe, any of the ideas I've presented in this video. But yeah, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.